Hi Sixten, how you doing?
Doing great. And you?
Yeah, all right. Doing good, pretty good. It's Friday here in Denmark, so just looking forward to the weekend.
As always.
Yeah.
Looking more forward to Monday, but okay.
All right.
Small kids. We wanted to talk a bit about ecosystem selling and the different actors in that system, as I think we both have encountered more and more of this in our everyday business. So I think right off the bat, it would make sense to talk a little about what is an ecosystem and what is partnership selling.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess you could look at it the way that you have some customers that could potentially buy your products, right? And if you go back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, then you had a very large influence as a sales organization over who would buy your products, because you had a lot of FaceTime with them, you could meet with them. But then this big shift happened, right, where the buyers will go to many other channels to look for information. They have much more education by their own, and you're only, like 4% of their time during the buying process. So the trick is really there to figure out, well, are there other people engaging with the potential buyers that I have, that I could form more deeper relationships with, that could somehow help me get my product to market. And that's really what ecosystem selling is, right? It's trying to create and nurture relationships with other types of companies that you don't sell directly to, but that could somehow influence the way you take your products to a market. The most common one is distributors, right? So you sell through some other distributors that have your products, they'll go out and sell them. But I think what's changing is also just that there are many more nuances to ecosystem selling these days than there were 10 years ago. I mean, there's integrators, service companies, the distributors, people that might not even resell your product, but just talk to the same end customers that you're talking to and have an influence over them. So just many more options, which just means that it's getting more important, but it's also getting more complex to figure out, okay, so exactly who will we focus on creating partnerships with, and how is it that we're going to succeed with them?
So in essence, like when the number of channels actually used to engage with your customer base and that your customers use it for research, and with the large expansion of decision makers at the customer side and more people being involved in this buying, taking kind of an informed look at that, and how can we optimize the number of touch points that we actually have with our customers in that. Makes sense. And for me, I think there's an important distinction about, or we need to granulate a bit how we look at partnership sales. Like the key idea or model that we have in B2B is like, Microsoft, 95% of revenue is generated through partnerships, and it can sound very good, like as an ambition, but reality is that just doesn't work for most businesses.
Right.
So when looking at this whole ecosystem and partnership sales, what do you think are some of the most important questions to be asking yourself in the commercial function?
I think the first one is, to which extent does our product even lend itself well to selling it through or with other people? Because you can have certain kinds of solutions that are, really complex, requires a lot of end customer collaboration, that doesn't lend itself very well to being resold by someone else. So that means something it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have partnerships, but it probably means something for the types of partnerships that you should have. You take Microsoft as an example, selling through partners is a completely standardized product, right? They have all the documentation in order, so you can easily sell it through other companies as a reseller. So it makes sense, completely standardized product. Everyone understands it. So I think look at your product first and figure out what kind of partnerships would work best for the kind of products that we sell. And then I think an important thing to realize is also back when I started out, very often the discussion would be something like, okay, so where will we have direct sales? Where will we have partners? So it became like a binary decision around how do we cover the market, and it's like either or. And I think that's a wrong way to put it up. You can be in the same market as long as you don't have any channel conflict with any of your potential partners. You probably can't be competing around the same customers. But if you're operating in a market and you're forming partnerships with other kinds of companies that are selling into the same kind of companies as you are, you can easily do direct sales and then have partnerships as well. It's just more collaborative that you're doing it than this sort of very clear division of, here you're going to use agents or distributors, and here we're going to do it ourselves. Becomes, sort of best of both worlds you can succeed with.
And that kind of also puts some work to be done back at you as a commercial organization of tailoring how do we actually choose to engage, and what is the rules of engagement and the alignment in this role to see that it's a win-win situation, that it's not an unfair kind of setup.
Right.
That we do. And I think when we wrote Teams That Sell, we had this interesting distinction between the product or service being super simple or complex, but also how the value materializes for the acquiring part. And I think in that matrix, it's also interesting to see how does partners play a role in that whole ecosystem. Is this a pure partnership play? Do I need to have integrators or technical setup involved as a part of the value materialization? So how important is partners in each of these? And I think there are some interesting archetypes, or at least considerations you need to make in that setup to figure out what's the right partner strategy for me.
And we can see that it's becoming a lot more important for some companies. If you think about some of the companies that we work a lot with, industrial manufacturers of big machines, go back 10 years, then the equipment would be sold, shipped, installed, and then you would see them again in 5-10 years when they needed to replace it. So it's not that there wasn't service around it, but it wasn't as big of a thing as it is today, because the products have changed, right? So now you got much more complex solutions, they got software in them, so service suddenly becoming more important for other reasons as well. Like you want to prolong the life of this equipment, you want to make sure that it runs in an energy efficient way, all kinds of reasons why you want to do service. Now, what does that mean if your primary business is to make money on selling equipment? Probably means that you need to find, onboard, enable a whole lot of partners, right? That knows your equipment, that's able to service that equipment, able to extend the life of that equipment, and probably also able to give you a heads up when there's a need to replace that equipment or get new equipment. So suddenly also, because we've stopped from a lot of companies anyway, stopped looking at just the equipment sale itself, but at the lifetime of the equipment, then suddenly partners become super important in able to deliver that service if you don't have the coverage to do it yourself and you don't plan to have that yourself.
Yeah, it makes complete sense, I think, and also that I think an interesting point you're making is that this partnership model also over time, but we have taken some of these components from the early adopters in the software industry and see that maturing more and more in the industries because of the technological revolution that comes back into every industry that we work with and that we see. So I think a consideration I would have in figuring out how do we actually as a commercial organization work with this, what I've seen both in software and in the industry, where do we start with this? Where do we make sure that the partnership is actually becoming a channel and not just stuck in the research and about, it would be super nice to own this touch point as well. How do you start?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I mean, you probably start with something that's simple. But I think that there's just a quick important point to be made around what's really important when you start selling through partners, because a lot of companies already are. They don't just have a direct sales force. They're using agents, distributors, all kinds of partners. But I think an important point is that like you have your own salespeople, they go out and sell. You don't need to enable them to sell your products. Ideally you do, but you don't need to do it in the same way as you do with agents, because they're on all the product introduction meetings. They've seen the products, work with them for a while. So it's just when you start selling through others, I think what very often goes wrong is that it's kind of like it's just a good idea. We have all these other people that are then pushing our products in the market, talking to customers. But you have this idea that if we just sign them up, then business will come in from them. It's not true.
Mm.
You know, you have to help them basically build a business from a collaboration with you. And I think that's one of the big pieces that are missing, because that's what you talked about Microsoft. That's something they've done really well, right? All these software as a service companies, because their primary route to market is through partners, that's been their thing.
Mm.
So they know exactly that they need to have, big conferences, fly some people into Las Vegas, monthly whatever education days. They have a shit ton of stuff to enable, educate, inspire their customers or their go-to-market partners to build businesses. And I think that's a big piece missing in many of the kind of companies we traditionally work with. Companies that have a route to market that was very often born out of having direct sales or distributors that aren't enabling these new kind of partners that they want to onboard in the right way. And then often they see them fail, right? And then they just revert back to the old way of doing things. And I just think it's not because it is wrong for them to have partners. I just think they didn't quite do it the right way. Yeah.
And I think that you strike on a very important point. I think as a partnership is very much to be seen as kind of your own salespeople. You need to have the kind of right incentive structure. Yeah. You need to understand what's in it for me, what's in it for you, and strike that balance to have an effective channel. And just that, we sign a document and then I'll just wait for the orders to come in. Doesn't really happen. Nothing.
I mean, when very often you've seen this, right? That they'll celebrate that we just signed a new channel partner. Like, oh, that's amazing. We signed a new channel partner. But it means nothing, right? All that is just that now there's a little bit more likely that some business will come out of it. Yeah. So I think this idea that we just need volume and a lot of partners signed up, that's not the right way to look at it. You probably need to start just by having a few, then making them a success and figuring out what works, and then you expand from there. So to your question, where do you start? I think you start with a few partners and then go deep on that to try and figure out what does it require for us to drive sales through these types of partners. Because you don't want to scale it out and just spread yourself out too thin before you figure out the answer to that question, because it's very likely that you'll basically just waste a lot of time, and you'll waste a lot of their time, and all they'll have is like if you're lucky, your logo on their website or something like that. Yeah. But so be a little bit selective around who you choose as partners, and then make sure that you invest and actually enable them to become a success with you.
A reflection I've had, at least also in this identification space, is to, at the very early stage, because I definitely do agree, start small and then accelerate your learnings, is in the identification process of figuring out what is a partner and where can I find these partnerships, to essentially look for synergies, much like you would if you are acquiring a company. Now you're just entering a joint venture, essentially. Yeah. So is it on product synergies? Yeah. Do I have something that is going up or downstream in the value chain where a collaboration would make super much sense for the end customer? Is this about figuring out, do they have a unique channel to market where we can use this as a channel partnership? Yeah. Or at the end stage, on a customer level, do we have some synergies on a customer base where we can support each other and actually create a win-win situation at the destination at the customer level? And try to use that whole go-to-market map as the lens to identify where is the potential to be captured in this.
And also in that assessment, making sure you're very aware of how important could we potentially be to this partner? Yep. Because I've also just seen that very often. Sign a big partner because it looks big on paper, but you're just a tiny little fraction of their business, and they give you no attention. So also figuring out, who are good companies for us to play with, because we could be relevant for them given the size that we have, the importance we have in their business. So bigger isn't necessarily better here either. You want someone who's willing to play ball with you, right, and actually have a partnership with you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is what I at least see time and time again. I've been working with a client in some building materials where they had a lot of contractors as partners. And one thing that was very, very obvious in that was that they saw that they were like giving a unique opportunity to actually get really close with this product, but the reality is that they accounted for like less than 5% of their revenue.
Yeah.
Or like that needs to be balanced in some way, and realizing or checking yourself to what is my importance is super important. The same when I look at a client in the software industry, they were also, we are now giving you this baton that you can just run with and then get a lot of clients and so on. But that just never materializes.
Yeah.
And looking at the revenue generated from these partnerships, it falls in the same like the distribution as we do with most customers. There is a very, very, very long tail of partners that are more or less inactive, and very few that are representing the lion's share of the value actually generated for you.
And I think on that note, something that isn't talked about that often, but I always insist on including it in the kind of partner programs that we design for our clients is, when do we fire a partner? You know, like obviously there's some like when they breach a contract and stuff, but be very clear on what requirements does a partner have to live up to in order to get the benefit of our time, our products, our services. So just being very clear that it's totally okay to fire a partner as well. If they're not investing anything back in the partnership, then you probably don't want to do it either. And being very clear towards the partners on that, I think is something that's missing quite often, but such an important element of it. You know, when that it's totally okay to fire a partner, you know, just in the same way as sometimes it can be fine to say to a customer, look, I don't think this is the right collaboration that we got going on. Probably find someone else.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess also the other way around, be open and put like some requirements on yourself. What do I deliver to you as a partner to really emphasize that win-win aspect of having a healthy partnership setup? Because otherwise, if one side is kind of winning, then at the end that will tilt to one direction and end up breaking the setup.
Yeah, and there really should be that dynamic of, I mean, most companies that work with this in a professional way, they'll have something called a partner program, right? Some sort of like tiering of, you can be a bronze, silver, gold, diamond, or whatever you call it, right? And that's really the logic of any partner program, is that if you meet certain criteria or certain requirements, you know, you've invested in getting your people trained, you sell for more than such and such of our products, these kinds of things, then some benefits will follow. And the more requirements you meet, the more benefits I'm able to give to you. And that's the constant exchange that you can talk about with your partners, because that's what it is, right? The more the partner can do, the more you can do for the partner as well. The easiest one is this kind of discounting, right? Like how much discount can I give the partner so they can earn a margin? Well, it depends. How much can you sell? So being very clear on these requirements and the benefit that are in play, and how they differ as people move through these different tiers that you have in your partner program is super important. Because that's the kind of conversation your channel managers or partner managers should be having with those partners. If you do some more, then I'm able to give you some more as well.
Most clients we work with have different like routes to market, as you mentioned. Direct sales, partnership, might also be that you have some digital sales and so on. How do you think as a commercial leader you manage these different go-to-market motions and these different channels in the right way? What should you be asking yourself?
It's a really good question, right? Because it used to be quite easy. So if I had direct sales and then I had some other companies that I sold through, dealers, distributors, it was quite easy, because that way I could just have some people that were focused on selling directly and some people that were focused on selling indirectly. But now suddenly, if we're looking at partnerships in a different way and saying, well, actually it's different kind of companies working around the same customer that we could somehow benefit from having a collaboration with. Now, how do I start organizing around that? Because let's say you and I were hired in a sales organization. My job was to sell directly to clients, and your job was to try and influence the other kinds of companies that existed in that ecosystem that could influence how well I was doing. You would basically be doing a lot of work, and I would be getting all the credit for it, because in the end, you made it easier for me to sell my products. So there is something around, like, how would you organize that? Would you organize it on the same team? What makes sense? We're working around the same end customer, although we're taking sort of different approaches to it. But at the same time, it's widely different things that we're doing, right? You're out there trying to influence some people. I'm out there trying to sell directly, create opportunities, and drive them towards a close. So maybe it makes more sense to split it up. There might also be something around the proportion of companies relative to each other. I might have 100 accounts I'm working on. You might have 10 big partners. So how does that do? Maybe you're covering a bigger market. So there's all kinds of considerations that makes it a little bit tricky, actually, as a commercial leader to figure out, how do I organize around this? In some companies, when you have a few salespeople that are covering big geographical areas, it makes most sense just to have someone who's responsible in general for who do we have partnerships with, what do those partnerships look like, and then when there's global key accounts, making sure that we're coordinating people around those, but then allocate it down to those who also have direct sales responsibility to have 10%, 20% of their time engaging with these channel partners, because it's also then that's where they would get their information from. It might be who they would work on specific opportunities together. So I think it makes sense sometimes also just not to split it into two different roles, but say we probably need someone who's responsible for driving sales through that channel. But then it could easily be something that, like a responsibility that we allocate down to people who also does direct selling. Although that's really difficult too, right? Because it is different jobs as well. So you're then lacking some specialization there in the role. And it's two different roles trying to enable a partner to sell than selling directly. So you have to have really good salespeople to manage both of those role types, I think.
And a reflection also for me is that when you look at these programs and how do you do, because there's many ways that could potentially be right, but I think in Evergreen that holds true in all sentences is that we need to view this as the ecosystem is of the different touch points. And when we do sales management operating models, or when we have our cadences, we can neglect partnerships in the same way we can neglect marketing in most senses. We need to have a communication flow and a collaboration between all, because we have different touch points that all encompass the buying journey or the customer journey, where you have these different touch points. And at the end of the day, as a commercial leader, the more aligned your touch points are and the more information they gather, the better an outset you have to creating amazing customer experiences. Totally
agree with that, And it gets easier when you're a large organization, because then you have more room to do these specialized roles, right? A little bit more tricky in smaller organizations. You probably then need to have the same people wearing different hats. You know what I mean? They have to wear that channel manager hat on Monday, and then the rest of the time they can wear the direct sales hat. But in other kind of companies, if you're big enough, you might have the luxury of putting it into these specialized roles where you have channel managers, maybe even specialized channel managers in certain types of partnerships like integrators, distributors. But in smaller companies, that's more tricky.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think a couple of times I've seen this case where there's very much this discussion when you have a more complex product life cycle or complex service value realization. It takes some time. Who owns the customer? Is it my customer? Is it the partner's customer? How do we ensure? And I just think it's the wrong lens to look at it, because it is no one's customer in the eye of the customer. Right. It's very much an inside-out view that you end up with. But in your experiences, like, how do you ensure that communication, that alignment? Because in essence, it is two different companies that are working on a joint activity. So how do you do that in the best way?
I mean, it's what you're saying is that there's probably a poor relationship going on in that partnership, right? So it is really about building trust and relationships with the people that exist in a partner organization and the people that exist in your organization, because otherwise you don't have that free flow of information and that ability to collaborate around the customer that you would like to.
Mm.
So I think relationship building to the stakeholders in that other partner just becomes incredibly important, right? And I mean, we know that as well from, we work with partners, although we don't have like a formalized partner program, other kinds of companies that deliver professional services into the kinds of companies we work with. I call up people in there. I nurture relationships in those kinds of companies. Private equity companies that own portfolio companies, I nurture relationships there. You know what I mean? So we're doing it too, but it's very much on building relationships to those people and nurturing those relationships. And I think that's what you gotta be extremely aware of. Yes, building those relationships.
Yeah, totally agree. It's at least difficult to succeed if you don't have that trust. I mean,
Right.
It holds true in sales, but it definitely also holds true in
Absolutely.
partnerships.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Because otherwise it just becomes a transactional partnership. And that's okay for some types of partnerships, that it's, we buy and then we resell your things. But for the kind of partnerships that we're talking about here, it does require that exchange of information, ability to collaborate around something. And that requires that you have relationships and that there's trust in those relationships.
Yeah. So if you're in an organization and you have maybe a well-functioning, maybe a not well-functioning partner strategy and so on, how would you go about looking at your whole ecosystem and say, okay, where to optimize? How can I do better? What would be like the three main questions that you would think about?
Well, one thing I just realized over the last year or two is that there's a lot of companies that don't know that they have partners, that actually have partners that are working for them in the market. What do I mean by that? Well, take it as an example. Yesterday, I was with one of our clients. We were rounding off the strategy by involving the sales organization. And then the topic came to go-to-market partners, because that was a big part of where they need to play in order to win. They're like a smaller company, huge market, can't cover everything. So building go-to-market partnerships makes good sense. And then one of the sales people said, oh, shit, that actually makes sense. I just got a call last week from this Italian company that is a engineering company that's working on building a new site, and they just wanted to know our specifications because they've read about our products and they like them. And then he didn't do any. He just gave them the information, didn't think about doing more. But that's probably a good company to set up a call with and ask, can we just introduce a little bit more about what we do? We'd love to work closer with you, actually. And I think if a lot of companies think about it, they'll have a lot of companies that could potentially be partners for them that they would already be able to mention and start saying, is that a partner type? Should we do more proactive stuff around this? I mean, we've had examples of that too, right? Where people have just reached out and said, I really like the content. I've been following you guys. If you don't mind, I would like to set up a meeting between you and such in these companies here. I mean, okay. But then, obviously, after that, we should say, maybe there's something about this private equity thing. Maybe we should formalize a little bit more. What do we do with this? Because obviously, this is a good type of partnership for us. So there's this bottom-up approach that you can take to figuring out who is the ideal partner profile for us. You could probably figure that out by just looking at, well, what kind of partners do we already seem to have without really being fully aware of who they are and what we should do with them.
So there is this step one could be understanding what partnerships do we actually have, what's the formalized ones, how do they perform, but also maybe go the extra step and say, okay, what's all of the unformalized partnerships that we also have but haven't really worked with.
Exactly.
Because I think there's a lot of hidden value there that we don't realize, because it's not something where we have a long contract, and it isn't something where we have all of this
exactly.
working. Yeah.
No, totally agree with that. So I think there's this low-hanging fruit, and in just trying to figure out who are our organization already talking to that isn't buying directly. gathering that information and see if you can structure that into some partner types. Because from that's probably the best indication that those would be good partners for us to form partnerships with, because organically it already happened. So I think that's a good place to look and try and structure it around, rather than necessarily doing this top-down exercise where you say, well, it could be these kinds of partners, let's set up some decision criteria. My guess is very often you would already be able to identify some partner types that could be interesting to work with.
And then once we kind of know what the partners and the potentials are, and we've started to map some of these like untangible partner relationships, what do you think then is how do you structure a good partnering program around those?
That's a great question, Sixten. That's a great question. The reason it's a good question is because often that's a place where it goes a little bit wrong. Because you come at it from well, what are the solutions I have and how would I like them to help me get those solutions in with some end customers? But that's the wrong question for that kind of partnership, because essentially what you want to be having is a conversation around how can I help your business? I have this hypothesis that if we somehow worked a little bit closer together, had some more calls, you understood my business better and what we do, then I think I could develop your business too. What does that require? It requires you understand the business of your partner. So if you have a service partner, you have to understand what is a service business. How does it actually work? If they got some of this extra equipment here, would they be able to build some extra revenue that they could hire some more people into? They could develop their business. Is that what I'm suggesting here, that they would get out of it? So just starting to understand how a service business would then function and figuring out how exactly is it that I could contribute value to their business. Because essentially that's the whole conversation you should be having. I have this idea for how I could develop and improve your business. I think if we did more together, you could benefit in this way, in that way, in this way. That's the conversation you should be having. So it really starts with understanding better the business of the kind of partners that you're working with. Which is hard too, right? Because you become kind of like a business advisor to them. They're an expert in their business. So it's a tricky thing to succeed with. It's not easy, but it's the right way to go about it, because essentially that's the kind of conversation you want to be having with them.
Yeah, and as you mature in that conversation, you get to the point where you have built enough like trust to say, okay, now we can maybe take it to the next level and see how I'll show you mine, you show me yours, kind of. Then we get to that point where we can actually start to have a joint go-to-market approach and a joint offering towards the market.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. How formalized do you think like a partnering needs to be for different? I mean, we can take Microsoft again. Heavily formalized. There's a whole process in order to even get on the program and so on, and certifications. But is that the right way for everyone?
I think it depends a little bit on the kind of company that you are. Some kind of partnerships are a little bit more loose. Let's say that you have a company that sells equipment into the automotive manufacturing industry. I have a company that sells service into those. But we both benefit from exchanging information with each other. You exchange from getting information from me around what's happening out there with in the places that I have service with. Are they building anything new? I could benefit from getting information on what's being sold. They need service. So I think there's those kinds of information exchange partnerships that you don't need to have so much formalized around. It's more built around the relationship itself, and both benefit from the exchange of that information. Then there are other kinds of partnerships. You take something like service partnerships, where you need it quite formalized, because essentially I might be saying to customers, and you buy this equipment, and we have some great service partners to help you get the most out of that equipment afterwards. But what if you're not trained to do service on that equipment? Are there only some parts of service you can deliver on that? Would they then have to fly someone else in. So there you need to be more formalized in terms of what are the requirements, getting certifications, having people hired specifically for this. You need to be more hard there. And then obviously when you talk about something like integrators, distributors, that goes as well, because you need to make sure that they have met specific requirements that qualifies them to work with you. So I think it depends a little bit. For some, you need to be quite formalized, and for others, you don't necessarily need to be that formalized around, well, what is this? Well, we're talking exchanging information. What you probably need to be formalized around is sort of your own back-end model for how will I manage these partnerships. Because let's say I have 10, 20 partners that I have this model with of exchanging information. I need to make sure that I get those calls in. How often would I do it? Is it booked in the calendar? How would I get the information I might share with you? So you probably need to be more formalized around your sort of back-end model for how you would manage those partnerships. But you probably don't need to lay out. So there are 4 tiers of information exchange here. You either just share this, or you could share that. But if you share this up here, then I can share a little bit more. It's a weird partnership, right?
Yeah. And then I think the pragmatic approach that probably needs to be in place for most of these is you can't really blueprint yourself out of everything how it should work before you start to actually work. So this making sure that you have some good like guidelines about this is kind of how we want to do it, and then actually start working to start realizing some of this value up front instead of putting it to the grave in clauses and if this then that for a partnership for all eternity, because that will never kind of be a good vehicle to test it out and realize some value and see if there is benefit in it.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So yeah. When you've seen partnerships go wrong, I've been wondering, where do you see most often the pain point or the nugget that kind of ruins the cogwheel? Where is that found?
2. The first is very easy. You got the wrong partner. You were happy to sign the contract. Yeah. They were happy, but you weren't really that important to them. They weren't that engaged in it. They seemed very excited in the beginning, but then suddenly, they weren't really that engaged. So there's a lot in just the selection of the partner where it goes wrong. But the other part is that, you sign up a new partner, everyone is really excited, and then you sort of drop the ball a little bit. It would be a little bit like you hired a new salesperson, and then the first day, like, oh, welcome, this is going to be great, and then you just disappeared. And they were sort of left on their own to try and figure out anything. And very often what they would do is say, oh, fuck it, I'm out of here. I'm gonna go find another place to work because I'm not going to be successful here. And it's the same thing that would happen with a partner. If you just sort of like sign the contract, you say, good luck, here's our product sheets. Let's catch up in half a year and see what you sold. They would very quickly, they probably won't call you and say, I'm going to finish the partnership. They just won't invest in it because they're not succeeding with it. Yeah. So just having sort of a hypercare period with new partners that you sign and over-investing in getting some quick wins, making them a success. I think that a hypercare program that you have with new partners is super important, because if you get it right that first year and make sure that they see the benefit of that partnership, much easier from there. Right? Then you can solve all kinds of problems that come off. But if you get off on the wrong foot, it's very likely that it'll just sort of fizz out the partnership and they won't invest in it. And then you'll afterwards, but they're not doing anything. You didn't do a lot either. you just onboarded them, and then you went off to the next one.
Yeah, it becomes a battle of words. You didn't do, I didn't do, which is not a fruitful situation.
So then I like when they have these hypercare periods for new partners.
Yeah, and maybe the over-investing makes a lot of sense in the term of the really good partnerships. They pay dividends well in the future. It's a really good vehicle to just get continuous interest and revenue, and also get some insights that you wouldn't get in order to actually look at your own portfolio and your own channel structure and say, what can we do better?
Absolutely.
And that is where the partnerships become really, really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, they're so valuable, these partnerships, because in the end customer that you're going after, there might be conversations they would never have with you that they might have with one of your partners. And it might be that the partner, the company you have partnership with, these kind of like less formalized partnerships, they might not even have to mention you by name. They just promote your technology. They just say, well, there's basically these kinds of solutions you can buy. If I were you, I'll go with this one over here. It's a much better technology. It's going to save you a lot of money in the long run. They can say these kinds of things, and it has huge influence on the buyer because it's coming from a different source. So a lot of the time, it's about creating these alliances, really, where you don't even have to say that we have a partnership. We now promote each other. So often it can be a lot more subtle than that too, like the information exchanging, the technology promoting, these kinds of things.
Yeah, and especially in this case, we'll also talk a bit about in teams that sell, but buyers are no longer buyers. It's often buying committees that comes from various places in the organization. And you might have a very good relationship to some of them, and some of them you don't even know. So if you have partnerships that have different entry points and so on, and you're working towards the same goal, that just also it might be the thing that tips the scale. That is to have enough yeses in a buying committee to leverage each other's trust and anchoring in order to get to the right place. Yeah, definitely agree. So
well, it's just like even companies that don't think they're a partnership selling model. I think they should really sort of like question that. My guess is that they are, like even if they're not generating revenue through a channel that's called distributors or service partners, then it's very likely that there are people from companies that are talking to the same kind of people they're talking to, and the same kind of customers that they're targeting, and that they could benefit from either getting information about those conversations, getting into those conversations, collaborating on something. So even companies that think they are, we're a direct sales company, these are very complex products that we have requires a lot of engagement. I really think they should question whether that excludes them from also being able to build and nurture relationships to other companies than just the end customers that they're working towards.
Yeah, 100% agree. And at face value, you might have companies that kind of, but we don't. I think my hot take would be most every company has at least a partner channel that they should consider where they
100%.
Even, I mean, if most people, if you ask my father, Quadrant, how do we sell? Oh, it's relationships and it's the partners and directors and so on selling. Yeah, but it's also partners. We actually have a lot of partnerships also in just our sales motion.
Absolutely. I think that's my point, right? I mean, we sell complex solutions that require, we don't necessarily meet the criteria for, we should have partnership in our go-to-market motions. But we already do. We're just not that aware of it, and we're not nurturing it in a structured way. And that's probably what most companies, even those that don't rely, those that are not the Microsofts of the world, where it's their dominant model, could probably benefit more from that. But that's also where it gets hard, right? Imagine you're a commercial leader. You're responsible for the commercial organization. You have some salespeople, you have some marketing people, and you have a lot of other roles. You're thinking about, okay, should I invest some more resources in this partnership selling? And then someone asks you, well, how would you measure what you get out of it? It could get quite complex. It's a little bit like the whole discussion on, well, how many times did marketing touch that lead, and how much can we then attribute to? And then that's where all the conversation is suddenly moved to. So I think with partnership, unless you want to go down that route and start trying to attribute and track and all that, there's probably also just sort of a leap of faith in some of this, in saying, look, it's happened quite a lot of times that we've been called up by such and such, and they've asked for some specifications. They weren't the end buyer, but they were, or that we heard from an end customer, they talked to and they really liked you guys. There's also, unless you want to go down in that, we have to be able to measure exactly how much does these touch points with partners contribute to the bottom line. Yeah, I don't know. I think you could get down a rabbit hole with that, and I would much rather say, do we believe in this? Do we think that it's true that there are other companies out there that are talking to the same kind of clients that we're selling into, that we could benefit from having regular engagement with in a meaningful way? And if the answer is yes to that, I think you should go ahead. Yeah, it's probably a good place to allocate resources.
Yeah, totally agree. So, looking at what we've been through about trying to look at what is partnerships and what's in it, how do you structure this, and some of the pitfalls. As a commercial leader, if you are to instill some ways of working that would make sense for you, whether you have or have not realized a formal partnership structure, what do you think is the telltale sign of a healthy approach to your partnerships? What would you install in your yearly cadence?
It actually comes back to the same thing as what's healthy cadence when you're doing account management, because very often account management gets a little bit mixed up with opportunity management, but really account management about building and nurturing relationships to stakeholders in the accounts that could potentially start a sales opportunity and close a sales opportunity. And in order for you to do that, you have to be very clear on, why would I have a meeting with some of these stakeholders? What am I going to tell them? You have to bring some value to the table. Is there some new legislation that's relevant, some new information, some new technological developments? I have to be able to call them up or organize meetings with these stakeholders and have something that is actually valuable for them to hear about. And I think the same goes for partnerships. I'm not saying that you should never call up a partner and say, how's it going? What's happening on your side? And maybe you say a little bit about what's happening. Like relationship building. But that just can't be the whole partnership. No. You have to be very clear on what's the value I'm adding to the table here and what's the value that I would like in exchange. So being very clear on these kinds of touch points that could have with them around, typically it is this, like something new is happening, either in the market, with the technology, with legislation, people that are moving around is also really good information there. But that would be what I would look at of whether there is a healthy relationship, is whether we're having those kinds of conversations. Because as we talked about, what's the foundation for a good partnership? It is the relationships, it is the trust. And the other things, it's not that it isn't important, like how do we collaborate if there's a joint opportunity we're working on? How would we split commission if we close a deal that you generated? Those are obviously important too, but they can often go wrong if we don't have the right partnership in place, which means in this case the relationships.
Yeah, so I think it essentially comes back to also seeing partnerships as what they are. It's also a channel, just like your sales force. So you have to install some of the same rhythms that you have here, where trust is, if not more important than in a partnership setup. But you need also to have like a partnership strategy that can be revised at sometimes. It's a dynamic relationship, a dynamic marketplace. Things change over time. To have some partner management principles installed, where you have how do we have these exchange, and then also maybe not structuring yourself into a corner where you have no freedom and you have no flexibility, but let this be up to having building those relationships, building that trust, and building the businesses together and sharing information where relevant.
And a thing that I've seen that I think is quite clever, because sometimes it's also, okay, so should we wait until one of the executives make a decision to say, yes, partnerships are important to us, we're going to formalize it. I've seen some salespeople that are very clever. I've seen something that they do that I think a lot of salespeople could benefit from adopting. And let's say that you have a market. Your role is to sell directly. It is to create new sales opportunities, identify them, manage them towards a close, do account management. What they do is that with the clients they already have relationships with. When they engage with them, they'll ask stuff like, so who are you buying such and such from? Other things that client is buying, trying to figure out who are they buying from. So they do that, and they say, we buy our IT services from this, and we'll buy Power BI support from the such and such. We buy this from them and them. And essentially what the key account manager is trying to do is to figure out who else is selling to the ones I'm trying to sell to, because I would like to talk to those people and hear who else are they selling to.
Yeah, that's smart.
So they just start doing it organically, even though it's not part of their job, because they know that it's a really smart way to drive new business. So that is something that every salesperson could basically start from tomorrow without any organizational changes, any partner program. It's just starting to ask the people they're already selling to, who else are you buying such and such and such from? And then basically contacting people in those organizations. And that could even be salespeople from those organizations that you just want to get to know better, because they would be the ones who are sitting with good market information too. So I've seen some good salespeople do that, and I think it's a really smart move. I think that, they're obviously doing it for a reason, and that it could just be a matter then of start doing it as an organization, and then you formalize it afterwards if you find out that this actually makes good sense.
Yeah, make total sense, and having that, not the mindset that every other service or product that my customer is buying is a competing product that steals some of my business, but seeing it more as, no, it's not a competitor. This is a potential synergy or a potential added information that I can get.
Spot on. The simple one is just you're selling equipment. Who are you going to buy the service from? Who's going to have the service contract on this afterwards if it's not us? It's going to be them. Who are you talking to from in there? I would just like to, talk to them, make sure that they understand the product, and so easy.
Yeah, easy, and also from the point of view of the customer. I mean, I wouldn't look at you as a seller of equipment there and be, please don't inform the service.
I'm not going to tell you that.
It's a very just like transparent and open conversation to have.
Yeah.
So I think that's
and that's why it works so well, having that question with your clients. It works really well, and people on the other side are very open then to take the call too. When you reach out, say, hey, I'm working with the same client as you, and I just want to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, not a bad call.
No, it's a good call.
Exactly. So I think in at least from my perspective, we have. Be mindful about your partners. Figure out where are they at all. What's the touch point? Where in the value chain does this fit and make sense for me? Be pragmatic about partnerships. Don't try to over-engineer it, but also realize what kind of partnerships they are and like where to formalize and where to not formalize. Manage partnerships like any other relationship. You can prune your partnerships as well. Sometimes it just doesn't work. You can date for a while, but it never gets to a marriage. That's fine. Like nobody gets hurt from that. And then also to install it as any other channel where you have sort of a strategy. What's in it for me? What's in it for you? And manage that strategy and how we are taking our channels to market and maintaining those as any other channel.
And really, if there are any salespeople listening to this, I don't know, you can just do it.
Yeah.
Like no one's gonna beat you over the head because you contacted a salesperson from another company, but it's a really smart move. So they can actually just start doing it. They don't need to wait until there's an organizational change or someone sets up a formal role as head of channel or something.
No.
It's actually something that you can just go ahead and do.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
To you too, Sixten.